Good morning, everybody. Welcome all. It's always a pleasure to see everybody every last Thursday of the month. We're here all year, as you know, as Blaine said. 2 months of the year, we're a little earlier. Just today, of course, a week before Thanksgiving, and on December 17th, mark your calendar, December 17th, a week before Christmas. Before I get started, I'd personally like to thank my good friend Dan Peterson, who's with us today. Dan, please stand up and take a bow, would you, mate, please? Dan is a true patriot. He's a good friend and a pal, and he's been a long-time attendee at Old Ball Pilots. He was a protagonist in the formation of Top Gun School, and he's been a great source for us, and he was kind enough to introduce me to our speaker today, Bill Dolster. So thanks very much, mate, and thank you for hosting Bill last night. So I asked our speaker today, I said, do me a favor, would you send me down a bio so I can introduce you? I didn't realize what a understated and humble guy he was. Here's what he sent me. He sent me these few words. He said that Captain Dolster is a native of Arizona and a graduate from the University of Arizona in 1991. During his 24-year career thus far, his postings have included duty on board both U.S. ballistic missile submarines, several carrier-based squadrons, and various staff jobs while living abroad in Japan and numerous different stateside bases. He has earned warfare qualifications in both nuclear submarines and carrier-based jet aircraft. His formal education earned him a Bachelor's of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering and a Master's of Science in National Security Strategy from the National War College in DC. And he tells me that he's an MBA graduate right now, an MBA candidate right now. So when I got this, I thought to myself, well, there's not much there. So I dug a bit deeper, and here's what he neglected to tell us. First of all, he was trained as a nuclear submarine officer, and he earned his Gold Dolphins aboard the U.S. Maryland SSB N738 Gold Crew, and he went on 5 strategic deterrent patrols in the Mediterranean in 1996. He's one of the very rare breed of guys who actually crossed over from nuclear, what he calls the nuclear mafia, to join the Navy Air Wing. And he promises to tell us today just exactly how he does that. He's a bit surprised himself how he did it, but apparently making that crossover is almost impossible, so that will be interesting to hear that. He completed training in EA 6B Prowlers, and he went on to be based out of Atsugi, Japan in 1998, flying off USS Kitty Hawk. He later flew combat sorties off the USS Abraham Lincoln in the opening weeks of the Iraq War, and in 2003, and then later on went to fly off other carriers in the Western Pacific. In 2008, he managed the training wing, VT-7, instructing fledgling young pilots, strike pilots and fighter pilots in T-45s. In 2012, he reported to the USS Carl Vinson as air boss, supporting both the 5th and 7th Fleet operations. In 2014, he went and became the commanding officer, as he still is today, of the Naval Air Facility down here at El Centro. As you know, it's the winter training ground for the Blue Angels. He has dual warfare qualifications in both submarines and as a naval aviator. He qualified as a naval nuclear engineer and accrued over 2,700 flight hours and 450 arrested landings on 10 carriers. He is a married man, he has a wife and 2 teenage children. He commutes every weekend from El Centro to his family in Arizona. He's a very fine man, and I'm very, very pleased and proud to welcome him. So come on up here, Bill, please.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here today. In this room sits a lot of aviation history and legend. I'll share some of my story today, and it's not all aviation related. My wife tells me it's interesting, but I think she's required to say those kind of things. So I put together a brief today, just sort of to go over a little bit of what I've done in my career. I have had a very unusual career, but I'm not an unusual naval officer. I've just been lucky enough to be put in unusual, kind of on an unusual path. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'm happy at any point to divert. I guess as most of you in the room know, it's hard to get pilots to talk about themselves, but once it starts, so I apologize up front. How much time are we trying to? 35 minutes. Okay, that'll be all right. So here's a little. I guess I should move out of the way so you can see my slides.
Wow.
This kind of just details a little bit of what Patrick talked about. I was born and raised in Buckeye, Arizona. My dad is a large animal vet in a very small town. And we lived right across the street from a crop dusting pilot when I was as young as this little boy over here. I guess he's been ejected from the room. But, and I remember when I was about 4 years old flying around my front yard with a pair of the crop duster pilot made me some goggles out of a 6-pack of beer, you know, the plastic kind of holders. And I logged a lot of hours in that airplane. And over the course of me growing up into being a young man, I always had somebody that would come into my life that was an aviator or Air Force pilot. My mom's college roommate was an F-4 fighter pilot, F-15 guy. He's passed now, but he also would always come and he'd regale me with his stories of flying with Robin Olds and Red River Raiders. And I was just fascinated, and there were others along the way. I knew I wanted to fly when I was very little. And I remember being in grade school, and we lived underneath the approach path. Buckeye is kind of between Fluke Air Force Base and the Barry Goldwater bombing range, where the jets would go out to do their training. So all day, every day, they would be going over top of my town. And I said, that's what I want to do when I grow up. Everybody said, yeah, those aren't real people. To a small farm town, you don't know that you can do that. So my story starts with my focus to fly, and I tried for a long time to fly. And eventually I worked my way out of high school and trying to get into the Naval Academy, or excuse me, the Air Force Academy. But they just wouldn't let me in. So I went down to the University of Arizona and started my degree, and I thought, well, I'll try AOCS, maybe through the Navy. And while I was down there, as I was telling Dan last night, a friend of mine said, hey, you should come talk to the CO of the Navy ROTC unit. He might be able to help you out. So I'll take the opportunity. I went and talked to him, and it turns out that he had for just this one semester, the Navy was trying a new thing. They were trying to bring in young men, primarily men, because at that time submarines were only for males, that would be able to go through Naval Nuclear Power School. That meant they wanted folks that were engineering, science, math kind of majors that sort of showed a little bit of ability to learn, and they would come into the Navy, and then maybe some of them would go nuke. And I said, well, Skipper, I don't want to be a nuke, but I'm an engineering major, and I wouldn't mind coming into the Navy. So turns out that as he kind of interviewed me that I had what they needed, and he gave me a scholarship that day. So I got into the Navy kind of through the back door after years of trying, and I was happy to be there. And then just before I get commissioned, at that time, that was when this would be, as I say here, 1991. So the Navy was on the downslide as far as the size of the force goes. They had over-assessed, as they say, for aviators, and they had under-assessed for nukes in submarines. So the force was out of balance. So they were looking to get rid of pilots, which at that point I had orders to flight school. And when I went through my initial training, or my flight physical to get my commission a few months before I graduated, they said, you've got high blood pressure, mister, and you're no longer qualified to fly. So I thought, well, that's odd, and I fought them on it, and they made me go back every day for twice a day or 3 times a day to get checked, and it just went, so I ended up taking on orders to go to nuke school. And I thought, well, I'll just go to nuke school, and then I'll just transition from there. I'll go down to nuke school, spend a couple months down there, and slide over to Pensacola and be fine. That wasn't the case. So at dinner last night, I was telling Pat this. When I show up at nuke school, I'm not there to be a nuke. I'm there to wait till I go to flight school, in my mind. And I thought this will be just a temporary stop for me along my path to go and fly jets for the Navy. And I find out that you can't do that. Or at least that's what they told me at nuke school. They said, no, you're in this, you're either going to get through this program or you're going to fail out. And because of where we are with naval force structure, you're going to need to get a job because you won't have one here. I thought, uh-oh, I might have jumped out of the frying pan into the fire on this one. So I buckle down and I work hard, and I get through nuke school and get off to my first ship, the USS Maryland. After it took me about 1.5 years, a little more of training, to go through nuke school, and then prototype training up in Idaho Falls on the what we call the Enterprise's prototype engine room. You learn theory down at nuke school, then you go and do practical up there at Idaho Falls. And then off to my quick stop at submarine officer school, which I'm not sure what I learned there, but it was 2 months in Groton, and it was awesome. Then down to Kings Bay, Georgia. Now I've got a picture here. This is actually a picture of us doing a swim call out in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Fort Lauderdale. And the internet is kind of a powerful thing. That's from a sailor that used to work for me. He had that on his website, so I stole it. But the submarines are, this crew is about 160 folks on a nuclear ballistic missile submarine, about 20 officers. The CO, XO, and then various department heads and division officers, and which I was one. And you show up as a brand new, in this case I was a lieutenant junior grade, show up and you go through learning how to run the reactor plant, learning how to drive the submarine, and then going through some oral exams to get your gold dolphins. And during the course of this, I told my commanding officer, after about 1.5 years on board, I guess a year and a half, that I wanted to fly jets for the Navy. And he looked at me like, "You're a submariner." I said, "I know, yes sir, but I want to fly jets." And he thought, this guy's on his rocker. I kept trying. I actually put in a package for a lateral transition. I walked in his office and I told him, I said, "Captain, I'd like to get your endorsement on my application to go and fly jets." And he said, "What?" So he gave me kind of a vanilla endorsement, sent it off, and the Navy eventually called me back, and they said, "Congratulations, we'd like to offer you a naval flight officer billet." And I said, "No, I think I'll apply again next year." I kind of paused on the phone. I could hear this long silence, and he said, "Now I'm offering you a way out of nuke power if you don't want to get nuked, right? You get that?" And I said, I got it. That makes sense, but I want to fly. I want to be a pilot. So I put an application in the next year. I'd done a decent job on the ship, so the captain was willing to give me a little stronger endorsement this time, and I was offered a slot to go and be a naval aviator, which I was ecstatic. I thought, I made it. This is great. Well, the nukes are a little different. Are there any nukes in the room? Good. They're fine people, great Americans. The head of the nuclear power, they sent me a letter that said, "Congratulations on your selection to flight school. Before you go, you have to take the Navy Nuclear Engineers exam, which is the equivalent to a PE for an engineering, civilian engineer. And this exam is a very, very tough deal. It's used as a way to kind of get rid of guys because they don't need everybody to go on. They need just about 40% of you to go on and up. So it is a 60% failure rate. Even if you pass, there's going to be 60% of you that don't. So it's a guarantee that there's going to be a large number of folks that go to DC to take this exam but don't come back with success. And so my captain knew that I was good at some things, but not good at others, and nuclear power might have been one of those things I wasn't as good at. And he said, Bill, he goes, I don't want to discourage you. There is no way you're going to pass that exam. And so I said, thanks, Captain. Sent me over to the schoolhouse. I spent 6 weeks studying, nothing but studying, about 12 hours a day. And I came back and I actually passed the exam. And he was shocked. And I was too. And I left the sub and off to flight school. So now I'm an unusual bird. I've got 4.5, almost 5 years in when I started flight school in 1996. And the Navy has got a very rigid kind of career path. And I knew I was off that path, and I had a lot of catching up to do. When I left the ship, the captain was actually very, very gracious. He was a nice man. And he told me, you'll be lucky if you make 04, Lieutenant Commander. He goes, I don't know why you're throwing away your career, but I hope you have a good time. I said, I will. I'd rather be an aviator for 4 years than a submariner for 20, sir. Thank you very much. And we parted ways. I go through flight school, kind of a typical track. I did a little bit of time in Pensacola. I did a new program that the Navy and Air Force had joint undergraduate pilot training together, so I got to fly the T-37. I've never flown a prop until I got to my base command. The T-37 was a little twin-engine jet. I'm sure that some in this room have had a chance to fly it. And then to Kingsville, Texas for my jet training. And out of Kingsville, I selected to fly the EA-6B Prowler. And I remember that day well. My wife was very nervous, and that's her picture right there, the beautiful Tammy. And she was nervous about where we're going to go and live. She wants to know. She's kind of a control freak. She likes to make sure that everything's all planned out, and that doesn't work well in the Navy. But so I come out of the CO's office where they tell you what you're going to go and fly. She said, what are you going to fly, honey? And I said, I'm going to fly the Prowler. She said, what's that? And I said, I do not know. You would think that you would know what all the aircraft are. I do. I wanted to fly Tomcats or Hornets. I knew there was an S-3 out there, and I thought, and the E-2C2, which I wasn't going to get selected for that. That was behind me. So but I didn't know about this other airplane out there called the Prowler. Turns out it's sort of like a pickup truck. It's very loud, pretty fast, but it does not turn well at all. But if you like to go fast in a straight line, it's your airplane. So it's an A6 with another couple guys in the back seat. Primary mission is electronic attack. So we go in, we're the blockers for the running backs, which would be the strikers, the Hornets and Tomcats. And so we're first in, first out kind of mindset is what we do. We'll go in, take down the enemy's air defense systems. They'll do their business with the strike fighter guys, and then once they're out of the envelopes, then we'll turn around and follow them out, kind of close the door. So once I learned that, I said, well, that kind of sounds cool. Maybe I'll do that. And the Navy agreed, so there I was. I was off through E-6B training. Turns out that airplane is a little bit of a handful behind the ship. Again, it's an A6, and then somebody said, well, we'll just stretch it and put a couple of guys and some computers in the back. And it looks good. Well, I don't know if some people don't think it looks good physically, but it looked good on paper to the engineers. It turns out it's got some really quirky flight characteristics that show up most behind the boat at night, especially. So now that I'm a Prowler pilot at this point in my life, I figured I better learn how to fly her because she was a handful of airplane to fly. I go off the VAQ-136, CAG-5 on the Kitty Hawk. I am what we call the Forward Deployed Naval Forces. When I show up over there, well, I guess I should say when I was at the RAGs, or what the Navy calls the RAG, the Air Force calls the RTU, my wife was pregnant with my son here, who in this picture is probably about 1.5 years old, while I was going through my day-night CQ. And we were up in Whidbey Island, Washington, very happy there. She loved it up there. And there was 10 of us going through CQ in the RAG. One of us was going to go to Japan. And the way the Navy does the forward deployed forces, when you have to have certain grades to go to the ship over in Japan, because in Japan they can't They don't have the ability to do a lot of practice landings because of where the airfield is close to Tokyo. It's very loud with jets flying around in the pattern. So they want guys that will go over there and don't need a lot of hand holding to be able to fly behind the ship. So they call it Pride A. Well, the 10 of us knew all going through that one of us was going to go to Japan, but there was one married guy and 9 single guys. So I knew it wouldn't be me. And I remember as we're going through CQ, as the guys started to drop out in the airplanes, takes a little bit of time to learn to fly behind the ship, and I could hear guys getting sidelined, and I knew they were done. And pretty soon there was just me, and the LSO comes up to us, hey, we're going to send you out for a couple more night tracks. And I knew what that meant, because you had to get some extra night tracks to go to Japan. I thought, oh, man, this is going sideways again. Seems like my whole career's been this way. So I called my wife from the ship and said, well, I'm done, honey. She's pregnant. She's due the next day. And she says, that's great. I'm very proud of you. Come home. I said, well, I can come home, but I have to leave in 2 days because I have to be in Japan. And it's hard to be a Navy wife or husband. But so I went home. She had the baby, my son Jake, and who's 16 now. And then I left the next day and came back to get her about 3 months later when Jake could travel. So my daughter Haley, my wife, and my son Jake. And I lived in Japan for 2.5 years. And it was great. So it's a really great place to visit, and someday we may go back. I would not want to stay there for a long time. It's just a little bit different. If you haven't been to Japan, it's interesting, but it is different. As you expect a foreign country to be different, but this one's different in a different kind of way. There's a movie out there called Lost in Translation. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it kind of hits on some of those points. It's just kind of Disneyland with some kind of psychedelic drugs mixed in. So, I did 3 Westpac cruises on the Kitty Hawk, and then also multiple trips into the Sea of Japan to do some multinational exercises that we do with the South Korean Armed Forces. And I know some folks in there have probably flown off carriers in the Sea of Japan, I imagine. It's cold, especially when you fly out in November, December. It's cold, the weather is terrible, and the seas are pretty high. And this picture here is actually when I came back from one of the trips in the Sea of Japan. You can see that I'm wearing what looks like a nice, comfortable turtleneck with some long sleeves. It's actually a dry suit, and it's the worst thing man's ever invented for a pilot to wear, for those that haven't had the opportunity to do so. The missions can be a little long, 2, 3, 4 hours. You have a relief tube in the Prowler. I'm not going to get too graphic about that, but you can relieve yourself of liquids if you need. But on a dry suit, because it's got to be watertight, the zipper looks like a chainsaw. These are the things they do not put in the movies. You have to be brave, or really have to go, but it did function. I don't know why I mentioned that. It's just the dry suit part is disturbing to me still. And so I started to learn what it is to be a naval aviator and fly around the ship. It takes you a long time. You get winged, you go through the rag, you get carrier cold, and you know just enough to be dangerous. And I remember showing up at the ship. I'm starting to feel maybe a little cocky, which in aviation will generally mean you're about to get spanked. So I got this figured out. I can fly this pickup truck. And my very first night after we called, we left on deployment. I'm out flying, come back from my night track to go and get a slider, as we call it, and I bolted. That sucks. And I bolted again. Because I don't know if I'm talking. Does everybody know what a bolter means? You come in with your hook down, you're intending to stop. And then you don't. You go back up again. And every time you hit the deck in a Navy aircraft, when you're going to do an arrested landing, you always go to mil power. So maximum power. You don't go to burner, but if you accidentally do that, we'll tell them to keep it there. But you go to mil power so that if you bolter, you don't have to wait for your engines to spool up while you're going into the water. So you'll immediately just take off with it. but you can only do that so many times, so you only carry so much gas. And so I end up boltering a lot, and I think probably 3 or 4 times. And I have to go hit the tanker at night in the goo, 1,500 feet above the Sea of Japan, and it was nasty and like sleet, ice, rain kind of mixed. And I get some more gas and go back down and start stabbing at the deck more. And at this point, I'm ready to say, okay, I'm not cocky. I just want to land. I'm looking. I remember going. The bolter pattern is a 1,000-foot pattern. It kind of takes you to the box, the standard box pattern. As I'm going down, when I beam the ship, I look over at the ship, and I've got my good friend, my co-pilot, who I still know today, and is an outstanding man. He's actually running the Growler Top Gun syllabus up at Fallon now. I look over at him, I go, man, I wish I was on that deck. This is at midnight. I'm the only airplane airborne except for the tankers that are airborne because I'm airborne. Man, I wish I was on that deck. And he goes, don't worry, Juice. Everybody else does too. I looked at him, I'm like, oh. Then he starts laughing, and that's kind of what I need. And I went around, I threw a great pass and pulled out the one wire by the roots and stopped. Anyway, it was a great time. We got to do some exercises down with the Australians, and then you see a note here called the Strait of Taiwan Response. At that time, the one star that was in charge of the carrier battle group was manned by Timbo Keating. Some folks in the room might know Admiral Keating. He retired after being the 4-star in charge of the Pacific Fleet. This time he's a 1-star. We were on a port call. I need to back up because this kind of ties into another point. I wasn't going to talk about this, but I might. No, there's no reporters in there, right? Well, we were on one of these Westpac deployments with Admiral Keating in, I guess 99. We got intel from the intel weenies that the Chinese were starting to go out and do some blue water operations with their Navy. We didn't like that, as the United States Navy does that, and some of our allies, but we were interested to know why the Chinese wanted to do that. This was, again, 15, 16 years ago. So it turns out that there was intel that these ships were about 800 to 1,000 miles away from the Kitty Hawk, and we're out in the Pacific, pretty far from land, doing what we call blue water operations, where there's no divert field, it's just the carrier. And I got called in by my skipper, and he said, hey, we're going to send you and your crew to go out and intercept these Chinese warships and just take some pictures. I said, okay, I can do that, skipper. So they launched an S3 tanker 2 cycles before us, so about 2.5 hours before us, who would go out and 600 miles from the ship, wait for us, and we'd meet them, grab some gas, and then continue on another 400 miles or so, find these Chinese ships, and then take some pictures and come back, and there would be another S3 that would have launched 2 cycles behind us, who would meet us 600 miles from the ship or so. And then we'd get some gas and come home and land and get a slider. It'd be perfect. No big deal. So we took off, 3 lieutenants, myself, Cooter, the guy I mentioned earlier, and another gentleman that's up here in this picture. We take off and we fly. And it turns out the S3 was where he's supposed to be. We get our gas, and we are way out in the middle of the ocean. There's nothing out there. And I didn't think anything of it. We're flying along, having a conversation with this guy in the back seats, trying to find these Chinese ships. So turns out where the intel guys thought they were was not where they were. So they were significantly further to the west. So we take a beeline over there, following the radar emissions from their ships. We find them. And there's 2 Chinese kind of about a destroyer-sized warships that are steaming around out there. And we're up fairly high, and I see them down there. So we've met our mission, and I said, why don't we go down and rig them? And what that means is you go down at low altitude, and you fly by close enough that you can take some pictures of the ship, so maybe 500 feet beside them, which is a good idea when you're a lieutenant. I do acknowledge that it was not a good idea now. So I dropped down, and I just kind of put the airplane on its back, and we pointed the sea and started picking up some knots, a lot of knots, and we start to come inbound on this ship. Now, if we have one surface warship driver in here. If you're out there in the middle of the ocean, sitting on the bridge drinking some coffee, and all of a sudden there's a 600 knot target coming directly at you, you're going to get nervous. And they did. So they lit us up with some gun dish radar and started tracking us, and it got a little sporty. So I started jinking around because I thought, I don't think they're going to shoot us down. I'm not positive. And so we zorched by. We don't get any pictures, but we caused some trouble. And so we climbed back up and get our gas. It all works out. We tracked. I thought, we probably won't mention this to the boss. We had some pictures from up high, so we turned it in. We did our whole deal. Then we headed to Thailand for a port call. Well, while we're in Thailand, there's an EP-3 flying around off the coast of China. And one of the Chinese fighter pilots went out to intercept him and banged into him and he caused himself to die, and then they almost put the EP-3 in the drink. And that aircraft diverts to Hainan Island, which is owned by the Chinese. And the EP-3 is our fairly sensitive signals intelligence collection platform. So they've got the crew, they've got the aircraft, and they won't give it back. And I'm not positive, but I wonder if it's because we pissed them off with the good idea to rid their ship. But we're in Thailand, having a great time, sitting by the pool, drinking some Mai Tais, and when there's an emergency recall to the carrier. So we head back to the carrier. The carrier gets most people on board, not everybody. Some people got extra liberty because we left, turned everything off, and hauled ass for Hainan Island. And off the coast of Hainan, about 150 miles out or so, we got to do, again, Admiral Keating, he really leaned forward in the straps, and we came up with a plan to bring some of these guys out to some of the fighters from China to come out and take a look at us. So I'm in the Prowler. We're, again, using our signals collection information. We're kind of flying around like we're at EP-3 up and down the coast. And then off 50 miles or so away, out of radar range, we had 2 Tomcats that were armed and looking for a fight. So we're flying back and forth up the coast, trying to just in the international airspace, doing what we do. Turns out they didn't want to come out and take a look at us. But we did have a plan also to go in and drop bombs on our EP-3 if we would give it back. So we kind of put that plan together and executed that launch, and I thought, this is crazy. But we're going to go in and drop them and bomb our own airplanes, they won't give it back. And when we did that, we got recalled just prior to the push time, and they decided to give us our airplane back. I think when they saw us coming, they thought, this is not good. It's gone from interesting to, we'll give you your airplane back, and they were happy to do it. I got a couple videos on here, and I'll have some more through the slide, but this kind of show what it's like for those that haven't had a chance to be behind a carrier. This is an old tape, but it's still a valid view that it's VHS, so it's pretty poor quality. But I will put it up here. And it's filmed from the cockpit of an S3, and it's going to show you day and night, side-by-side shots, just to get an idea what it looks like. Daytime is fun. You can bag day traps all day long. It's a lot of fun. Then they make you do night traps. And they're fun as long as they go well. But you can see that how much smaller the deck looks at night. You miss those? You can miss your day traps. You will not miss night traps. And then another video I found here. I mentioned pitching deck. The carrier is huge, 93,000 tons. You would think that a ship that big, even though there's some waves occasionally on the ocean, you would not think a ship that big would move. that they do. Now on this shot here, you've got an 860 parked on the bow and a Hornet. This one must have been broken, but yeah, and this is in the Sea of Japan. Now we don't, as I'm sure Dan can tell you, this captain didn't pick a great course. You don't generally drive headlong into the seas unless there's a good reason, and then there might be. I'm sure that helicopter is no longer, but it's probably still flying.
Serviceable.
Now this video here kind of shows the pitching deck, and it's got some music to it which I didn't pick. This is a cruise video, I think, that some guys put together. Good, you don't need to hear the video anyway. There's some scenes in here that'll show you what it looks like from the flight deck when it starts to move around a little bit. The other part you'll see as I get to it, I'll show you when the deck really starts to move, the LSOs have to take control of the ball, and they fly you onto the deck instead of just flying the visual landing aid. They basically, they're flying your airplane. They're your throttle. You do what they say, and you generally it works out pretty good. See, day tracks are fun. The deck's stable. Everybody's having a great time. Smiles all around. This is probably about 15 or 20 foot of deck movement. We'll fly as much as 35. It's not ideal, but that's about the limit. Then it just starts to get dangerous and we'll shut things down. There's the pickup truck. What you're seeing here is what the LSOs are controlling where the yellow ball is, the meat ball. They'll control where that is, and you'll fly your airplane based on what he's showing you. If he shows you low, that means add power. If he shows you high, you'll be pulling power off. And they just fly you into the wires. So I learned, this was my first tour, and I thought, I really like this business. I knew this is what I wanted to do. So I was glad I was able to escape the new power lamp. I head off, again, I'm on an odd career track. I leave my squadron tour just a little bit early. I know I've got to make up some time. I was lucky to make 04 while I was in Japan, so I had already out-succeeded my submarine captain's expectations. I head off to the RAG now as an instructor. I'm supposed to go and do a full tour there. This will be in 2002. I show up in January 2002. And it wasn't very much, probably 9 months later, when you could tell the war winds were starting to blow. And I thought, I think I need to get out there. So I found a squadron that had a guy rotating out that they needed another pilot, an 04 type, which I was. And so I managed to weasel my way into that squadron. They were out on the Abraham Lincoln. They were in Perth at the time, in January of 2003, on their way home. But I didn't think they would come home, so I bet on the come, and I got a seat in that squadron and flew out to meet them. And when I showed up, everybody's all happy. They're like, I'm not sure why they would send a replacement pilot to us when we're heading home. And because again, this was month 7 of their 6-month cruise. Well, we left Perth, and the night, it was New Year's Eve, or the New Year's Day, and we left Perth, and the Admiral came on and he said, we're not going home, we're going back to the Gulf, get over it. And we turned west and drove into the Gulf. And then everybody assumed it was my fault. But just kind of thought things would work out that way. It was only a 3-week-long air war, but it was intense, it was interesting. The Iraqis, they had learned some things from us from Desert Storm, but we'd changed our tactics enough that it didn't really buy them much. I will say they shot a lot, but they didn't hit much, luckily. But it wasn't from lack of trying. But they weren't real dedicated, which was good. They're also a little bit ignorant, which is also good. If you're going to fight somebody, those are 2 good qualities to have in there. So we flew our Operation Iraqi Freedom. I didn't know what to expect. I saw Desert Storm on TV when I was in college. And it was the first kind of televised air war. I remember seeing the tracer rounds coming up in the green of the night vision kind of cameras. And so what is interesting about a modern day war is my wife got to watch me go to war on TV. So all the wives were at home. I don't even know, I didn't think about this till now. I don't know how they knew that we were going to kick the door open on the 21st of March. But they were all at the CO's wife's house, drinking wine and watching us go into combat. It's kind of surreal. They weren't laughing. It was, my wife tells me it was very kind of serious and intense. But I don't know to this day how they knew that was the night we were going to go. It was fairly top secret. I actually went in on the 19th of March before operations began. We inserted special forces into the Iraqi oil fields because in the Gulf War they lit them all on fire there in southern Iraq. And so I was supposed to cover their insert by jamming radar and comms and stuff. And that was the first time I got to see a surface-to-air missile come up. And I still think of myself as that small-town Buckeye boy, and I'm just kind of watching all this stuff go on. I remember flying above a cloud deck and seeing this missile come through, and I thought, wow, that looks just like that movie Apollo 13. That's what I thought. And then as it went up, and it was trailing a big trail of flame, and then it turned into a ring of flame. I thought, well, it's coming. Those that have seen it know what that means. Oh, I thought, well, we better start going to work here. So, when you see a missile come at you and all you see is a ring of fire, it's I don't know if that's what Johnny Cash was thinking about, but it's coming at you. It was good flying. Very dedicated, brave men in the Navy today, just as there are in the Navy and Air Force today, just as there has always been. And I got to hear and see and be a part of working with some outstanding Americans and Brits. Now, I owe my life to the Brits because there was we had a Tomcat had a dual engine failure and went down, and then they ejected, and the call goes out on the radio. It's called foot race, foot race, foot race, which means we got 2 guys on the ground in this case. So I stayed to help cover the CSAR effort, the Combat Search and Rescue effort. But I'm behind on fuel, but I tell the tanker king, the guy that runs all the tankers, that we're going to need gas, we're going to need it to be further north. This is on about the 4th or 5th night of the air war. So they assured me that somebody would come up and give us gas. Well, as I stayed, we got to where we couldn't get home without getting gas. We weren't going to get anywhere near Kuwait without getting gas. And we finally get this thing put in a box with the guys on the ground. And so I start heading west, and I come up to Tanker King, and I go, where's my tanker? I need gas now. And they said, we're not coming up there. I said, who you said you would come up and get me? They said, we can't fly up there. There's AAA and flak and missiles. And I know, I'm here. Then a guy, British accent comes on, he goes, mate, I'll come get you. And he flew his tanker up there and did an excellent, just ran the rendezvous, turned around, I came right behind him and plugged. People were shooting at us. It looked kind of cool. And then I thought, as I'm getting gas, I'm like, whew, that was close. And then I realized this guy's got about 400,000 gallons, or pounds rather, of JP5, JP8. We're flying around in the AAA envelopes. It would have made a heck of a fireball, I'm sure. But I was glad to get off the boom and separate from the frag pattern as soon as I could from that guy. I get to opportunity to fly in some typhoons, I say here. We were off of the coast of Okinawa and doing an operation that would demonstrate our ability to respond to a crisis that might be near Taiwan. And we also wanted to demonstrate that we'll fly in any weather, including when there are typhoons coming. Well, the ship wouldn't be in it, but the airplanes would. So they would launch us out and we'd fly through this nasty weather and come back to the ship. But the typhoon started moving a little further, more rapidly to the west, so I remember coming back. In the pitching deck that I showed you, and I said 35 feet is the max that'll shut things down, and that is true, unless there's nowhere else to go, which was the case. The ship had gotten pushed so far to the east into the Pacific that there was nowhere else to land but the ship, and the ship was being overwhelmed by 2 typhoons that kind of were coming in from the north and the south. It was very hairy and interesting, and it will build your skills as an aviator, for sure. I don't know if any of you remember in 2003, we had a lot of reporters on the ships for the air war, and there was a huge dust storm that came in, and it kind of shut down operations. Well, Admiral Keating, now the 3-star in charge of the 5th Fleet, flew out to the carriers. We had a no-fly day while we were trying to figure out what to do, and it was this dust is like powdered sugar. He flew out there and he came in and talked to all the pilots in what we call the forecastle. And he said, the U.S. Navy will not stop flying. Everything on the shore was shut down. There was nowhere they couldn't take off. So we kept flying. And I remember launching in this stuff where you'd walk out to your airplane. You saw the picture of the pitching deck or the ship in the high seas. Well, from that point, you couldn't see the bow. So you had maybe 400 foot of horizontal elevation, horizontal view. I remember manning up my jet and launching off into this stuff. We do our systems check and our jet's down. We can't go in the country, so we come back and I come in and do a trap. And you're going to see it in this HUD video. This is from the same week. You'll see some of the good tools that modern technology can provide to a pilot flying in bad weather. Like in this video here, this shows the pilot where his throttle setting is, with this being kind of a midpoint. You'll see a little deal here, which the ship sends out and says, hey, if you keep this in here, which is your velocity vector, you're going to land right on the deck. It's going to be great. In the Prowler, you don't have any of that. You do have an ILS type of an approach, but it turned out as I checked into land that thing was down. And so all you have is what we in the Prowler world called an internal PAR. And that was where you just flew a 600 foot per minute rate of descent all the way down until you could break out. So that's what I did. And paddles would see your taxi light, and then they could start flying and saying, hey, you're high, you're low, you're left, you're right. And we flew that all the way down, but it turned out to be pretty low weather, as you'll see in this video. And we didn't break out until about 150 feet above the water, which the flight deck is at 60 feet. So it's pretty low. Here's 300 foot, and the blinking box is your rad out altitude.
You sure it's there?
That wasn't my video. I didn't have all those good tools. I'm sure my approach looked much better. But I landed, I'm taxiing out of LA. You get some adrenaline in your veins, and it causes you kind of maybe I'm taxiing out of LA, and my feet are shaking. I'm like, what's going on? And I taxi out, and they go, hey, Juice, we're going to put you in the spare and launch you. Oh. The only good thing about the dust storm is it made night traps a lot easier. You didn't have a lot of stuff to distract you. I finished that, this is my 04 department head tour, so I'm off to, now it's time to pay the penance and I go to staff duty. Normally staff duty is boring. You're a PowerPoint builder for the 3 or 4 star group you're working for. In this case, I worked for the 2-star head director of operations at U.S. Central Command. And the the director of operations is the right-hand man for the 4-star, which was at that time General Avisay. It turned out that the staff tour was actually really boring and a lot of PowerPoint. But I got the opportunity to go and be the executive assistant to the director of operations. So I was sort of I was the front office man. I would run the general's calendar. I would review all the paperwork that he would see. And I got to see a lot of highly classified, very close held. I got to see everything he saw, most of everything he saw, which was everything that General Avisay saw. And I got to see really a bigger picture that was outside naval aviation on how the armed forces are structured and work and how we execute, at that time, a 2-theater war in Iraq and Afghanistan. I found it very rewarding in the end, but also exhausting. I was rewarded with a trip to National War College to go to a master's degree program there, and I knew the detailer. He was a good buddy of mine. The detailer is the one who tells you where you're going to go in your career. I called him up and said, I'm ready for a set of orders. He said, where do you want to go? I said, I'd like to go to War College and take a year off to kind of catch my breath. He said, which one do you want to go to? I said, well, my wife really wants to go to DC. He said, well, I got a seat at National War College. I said, I'll take it. I don't know what that is. I'll go. But it turns out that's supposed to be for the elite. So I show up at this school with Air Force, Army, interagency folks, so CIA, FBI, NSA, all the 3-letter agencies are there, plus 45 international fellows. So there's about 220 of us in this school. All the international fellows, it turns out, are tapped to be like Minister of Defense, Minister of Interior for their country. So they're kind of movers and shakers, and I've got to swim in the pool with a lot of very, very interesting, very impressive men and women from around the world. An outstanding year in Washington, D.C. And then I was lucky enough to get a chance to go and get command, and as an aviator, command is your goal. And it's there's nothing better than being in command, whether it's a VT squadron or an air wing or a ship, or in my case, a base even now today. I had a lot of fun teaching young kids how to fly jets, teaching them about the culture of naval aviation, Naval Marine Corps aviation. I also learned that squadron trains 100% of the French naval aviators that fly off of the Charles de Gaulle. So every French naval aviator flying off of the Gaulle on their way over to Syria right now was trained in Meridian, Mississippi, and in that squadron, and a bunch of those guys I put my fingerprints on them. And they are, as much as the politics that exist maybe in the government over there that's different than ours, they're people, they're aviators, are professional, outstanding sticks. They really were a great group of guys. Now you can see a picture with my wife and my older kids. Same wife and same kids. Yeah. And I just finished my last flight in the squadron, so I look a little drenched there. I'm also cold because it's December and it's about 25 degrees. I had the chance, which I know my wife loved, I had a chance to do a taxi fan with my wife while I was in command. So all the wives got to get in the back seat. This is as I look back on it, probably not a great idea. They put, the mask on, and we didn't arm the seats up, obviously, but we went on the runway and we did a high-speed abort. We'd take off, we had 100 knots, we'd slam it to idle, put the brakes on, and stop. And she thought it was great. And I look back on it and think, why did we do that? It's kind of stupid. What if something would have happened? So, but nothing did. It all went well, and the ladies loved it. From Meridian, if I wanted to make captain, I knew I had to go back and earn my pay. And so I went back to be the air boss on the Carl Vinson. These are just some shots of my time in Meridian. Had tailhook with another naval aviator and a bunch of others. And so I went back and I was headed back to sea, and I got a chance to be the air boss on the Carl Vinson, which I thought would be a real grind. It turns out to be just one of the most rewarding tours I've had in my career. The air boss is in charge of about 600 sailors, running the flight deck, the catapult resting gear maintenance, the hangar bay, the 3 million gallons of JP that are kept on board to refuel the aircraft. And so I learned how to run a flight deck, how to run a big crew like that. All the air boss and mini boss are all aviators, they're carrier aviators, because we know how to fly around the ship, or we should. And so you just make sure everybody else is doing it by the book. And it's my goal when I took over my way out to the ship, I had two simple goals. Not to kill anybody, and not to get grumpy. Because all the air bosses, if you're a carrier aviator, you know, air bosses are grumpy. So those are my two goals. And I achieved one of them, which was not to kill anybody. I mean, I'm very easygoing. I love life and have a great time. I'm a good Liberty partner. But it wasn't a week into that when veins are pumping out of my head that I didn't know I had. Because it's scary when your goal is not to kill anybody and people continue trying to kill themselves. You just get frustrated. And there was an incident here. We're getting ready to pull into Perth, Australia, and we'll fly folks out sometimes to see what it's like at an operating carrier at sea. So these folks here that you see in this picture are all, for the most part, Aussies, except that's one of the naval aviators, and they're up there listening to me talk. Well, about 30 seconds before this shot was taken, I was having one of those moments. I had my back to I didn't know anybody was in the tower. It was just me and my crew. Somebody was trying to kill themselves or do something stupid on the flight deck, and I did what air bosses do and used some salty language. And then I turned around and I see this group of people, and their mouths are just aghast. And I just said, "Welcome to Pride Fly. I'm Captain Doster. I'm the air boss on the Carl Vinson." They got a good smile, and I think they thought I had some kind of mental disorder. So we were flying a lot of missions in support of, at this time, Operation Enduring Freedom off of Afghanistan, or in Afghanistan. And so the carrier would typically be here in the Arabian Sea, in an operating area somewhere in this area, and fly up here, do their work, and come back. The missions would be 7 hours long, typically for a single-seat fighter. That's an uncomfortable, long mission. And there was a weather report that the wind was going to start to blow over here. And we thought, well, 400 miles off the coast isn't going to get us. Well, the captain didn't shut things down, and I don't blame him, because the weather guesser said we're not even going to, it's not going to hurt us, we'll be fine. So they launched 15 or 20 airplanes out, and during the 7 hours that they were gone, it went sideways. And we got slammed with one of the biggest dust storms that they've seen in a long time. And I'm the air boss. My goal is still not to kill anybody or let them kill themselves. And there's an E2 that's coming back. E2s can't refuel, and their missions were even longer because they flew slower. So everybody else made it on deck. It was sporty, but they all made it on deck. And this kid is his first time in the fleet. He just shown up from the RAG, kind of like I was when I was spanked in my first tour out in Japan. And in his right seat is a lieutenant. That's the aircraft commander, who's done about a year in the squadron. Normally they won't. And the E2 is a very difficult airplane to fly. It's propeller driven, obviously, and flying behind the ship, it can be difficult. So they usually put an experienced pilot with a junior pilot. In this case, they didn't. And so this young kid got to come back. You notice the time here is 15:52. I apologize for the audio, it's very poor audio. But that's Paddle's pocket plane. He breaks out the first time up here. And I'll just point out while we're waiting here, this is the date, the time, the ship, number 70, the winds across the deck. They asked him how much fuel he had there, and he said, "I've got 3.8, so 3,800 pounds." This is his closure rate. I'm sorry, his closure rate, his range in meters, and his rate of descent, just so you can kind of get a feel for it. He's locked up, but he doesn't have any instruments. He's just flying an internal GCA, like I talked about. So he's hoping for the best. I don't know if you can hear the audio, and I apologize for that. The LSOs are talking to him. They're saying, you're high, right for lineup, bring it back to the right, you're low. They're telling him where he is, and he's supposed to respond to that, but he can't see the ship. They can just see the glow of his taxi light. At this point, I've got guys that are lined up along the landing area there, and I come up on my loudspeaker and I tell everybody to clear the flight deck. So you couldn't see it in that video, but when he broke out, he was over here, and he went right over the top of the tower, about 100 feet. So I thought, well, if you don't need to be up here, don't be up here. So we cleared the flight deck for this. The E2 only has about a 2-foot margin of air between center line and before his wings are going to clip those aircraft parked on the edge of the landing area. When you hit the ramp, it's not a good grade. We grade all our landings. Ramp strikes are the worst grade you can get. You know, they destroy your aircraft in your career. And that was as close to a ramp strike as I think I've seen it. It's hard to tell in that video because that video is in the flight deck. You know, you're looking at the flight deck here. He's probably about 2 feet above the ramp. Yeah. You know, it's a wingtip kind of going across. We're very happy. And I was very happy. I was clapping too. I had another year to go after that, and we went through a big maintenance build, and then we became the carrier qualification carrier for about 6 or 8 months. And at this point, I had a whole new crew, mostly on the flight deck. And I still wanted to maintain my goal of not killing anybody. But I kind of thought the best defense is a good offense, so I pushed these guys hard. On the last day that I was there, boss, on the last trip to sea as I was there, boss, we had a huge lump of guys to get through, a large number of traps. The operations officer, who's a good friend of mine, told the captain it's going to take us 6 days, captain, which would have meant we'd get done on a Saturday. We can't pull in on the weekend. It would have meant another couple extra days at sea, and I wanted to get home. So I told the captain, I think I'll do it in 4, maybe 4.5 at the max. And the officer said that's impossible. So I said, okay. And so I pushed them. And really all I did was let go of the reins, and they ran. And we set the record for a ship at sea for a number of day-arrested landings. It happened to be an old ACQ. We finished, and when the last aircraft got shot off the bow, I tell you, I felt like somebody took the weight of the world off my shoulders, because I hadn't killed anybody, and I was extremely happy about that. We lost some digits, maybe some people lost some fingers. There were a lot of banged up bodies, but that kind of comes with the territory for naval aviation on an aircraft carrier. My handler calls me. Once the last ship was down, I put my headset down and I just sat in my chair and I went, whew. Handler calls me. He says, boss, you need to get down here. You aren't going to believe what these guys did. I said, oh man, dang it. Well, I go down to the flight deck control, and while I'm on my way down, he sends these guys all were kind of hiding out of sight. He says, you got to come out. So we walk out the side door, and they had lined all 500 of these. Still gives me a kind of, meant a lot to me. And they just lined up, and they walked down the center, and we shook hands, and it was a good crew, an outstanding team. And I was very proud of all those sailors. You know, 18, 19 years old, and they would work as hard as you needed them to. It's just amazing. So when I hear bad stuff in the press about how the country's on the wrong track, or the new generation doesn't get it, I'll tell you, they get it. They don't believe what you read. Outstanding. I had an opportunity to go and be a Commodore of a training wing. And I said, I want to be a base CO. They said, well, we're telling you can go be a Commodore. I said, no, I know. I want to go be a base CO. And so they said, well, where do you want to go? And I said, I want to go to El Centro. I've always loved going out to El Centro. I'm from the desert. I'm from a small farm town. El Centro always felt like home. And we're living in Coronado at this point. Renting a house on Coronado. And it's kind of a nice place. So my wife said, Central, what are you talking about? So I want to fly one more time, David. She goes, I don't care about that. And so we had a little discussion and worked it out. And so we decided, well, we'll buy a house back in Buckeye. And I'll just commute on the weekends. And so she was amenable to that. And she let me go and do this job that I'm in right now. And it's really a fun job. I get to hang out with the little kids. There's a kind of a child and youth program on base and that I'm supposed to be in charge of. And a water plant here where I'm showing my Admiral boss. We make our own water. We treat our own sewage. We have a power grid, hotels, and food and beverage operations. Oh, we have an airfield. The Blue Angels. I got a chance to fly with a Prowler guy who went Growlers. He's on the team, so he took me for a ride in the slot of the Blue Angels show. I'll never do that again. These guys are insane. I know you've had a speaker here that talks about the Blues, and I watched his video and he talks about how close they are. You can't describe how close they are. They might say they're at 18 inches, but they're lying. The missile rails of the Hornet were resting on my ears. And I asked this guy, I said, Billy, how often do you guys swap paint? Just tell me. And he said, no, don't talk about it. We don't swap paint. That's impossible. But that was a good opportunity to fly with them. And that's where I'm at now. And I love it down there. And it's a very interesting job. It's probably going to be the last job that I do in the Navy. It's time for me to go on and find something else to do, I think. And so, I don't know. I love it down there. One of the best things is I get to fly. I've flown in that airplane, this airplane, that airplane, this airplane. I get to be the door gunner in a Huey, and I'll never do this unless my engine's on fire. But other than that, it's been a great tour down there. This kind of shows you just a big picture. I got to do a lot of things in the Navy. All of them were related to global events around the world, and this is what it looks like today, where we've got people. We've got carriers in the Western Pacific. We've got folks like EOD and CV units in Africa building wells and schools, special ops guys, and also CVs here in this part of the world, which is a trouble spot. There's probably some people up here that we don't have on the map. And we obviously have folks in Afghanistan, Kuwait, all around the world, doing great things. Every one of them joined the Navy to do something for themselves selfishly, and they're out there doing some really important work, giving. You end up, as I tell guys, you join the Navy and then you become the Navy eventually, and it's in your blood. Outstanding.